Hey guys, throughout the history of the not-so-civilized Western world, England has committed a great number of heinous crimes against the underdeveloped countries that it controlled. One of the countries the English Empire controlled was India. Through a series of fights, treaties, and more fights, the British conquered India in the 1750s, where the Eastern India Company was established. The British viewed their Indian colony as a foothold into Asia, and being the cash cow that it was, the British held onto that colony for dear life. Being the greedy, colonizing country England was at the time, they began trying to find new ways to make money off their recently annexed state. First, they tried taxing tobacco and betel nut, before finally taxing Indian salt. This might not sound that bad to us industrialized Westerners, but in pre-industrialized India, salt was one of the few commodities an endemically poor country such as India could produce on its own. People just gathered seawater, let it dry, and sold it on the streets. Seeing this, in 1882 the British passed a law that prohibited Indians from collecting and selling salt, a staple of their diet. Indian citizens were forced to buy the vital mineral from their British rulers, who, in addition to exercising a monopoly over the manufacture and sale of salt, also charged a heavy salt tax. Although India's poor suffered the most under the tax, all Indians required salt. Being that England now controlled every aspect of Indian salt, and that the only way the Indians could get their salt is by buying it from the British were now able to charge exuberant prices for the cheap and bountiful resource. Side note, one of the main reasons curry became popular in India is because the lack of cheap salt meant the Indians had to find other ways to season their foods. Now they are the curry world champions. From the 1880s to the 1930s, the British increased the tax of salt several times, causing national outrage. The British government's taxing of salt at 8.2% was tantamount to greed and ridiculousness, as is charging Eskimos for scooping ice, or charging Africans for scooping dirt. So, to protest this, on March 12th, Gandhi and his 78 protesters marched 240 miles. They picked up more and more people at each village, and by the time the swelling ranks arrived in the coastal town of Dandi on April 6th, they had formed a train that ran around 2 miles long. At its climax, Gandhi gathered the crowd around him, scooped a handful of salty mud and said, "With this salt, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." Gandhi encouraged everyone to make illegal, untaxed salt, and by the time India regained its independence 17 years later, common salt was indeed common salt. The only problem was, common salt contains little to no iodine, an ingredient crucial to health. By the early 1900s, governments had realized that adding iodine to salt was one of the cheapest and most effective health measures the government could take to help prevent birth defects and mental retardation. Even Indian doctors realized that with India's iodine-depleted soil and catastrophically high birth rate, they could save millions of children from crippling birth defects simply by iodizing their salt. But even decades after Gandhi's march onto Dandi, salt production was an industry by the people, for the people, and the iodized salt of the West, pushed onto India, contained a whiff of colonialism. Although it would cost India just a penny per person per year to produce enough iodized salt for its citizens, 500 million people currently cannot get enough iodized salt regularly, causing India to be the nation with the highest rate of birth defects in recent history. The consequences are grim. The lack of trace iodine causes goiter, an ugly swelling of the thyroid gland in the neck. If the deficiency persists, the thyroid gland shrivels up, and since the thyroid regulates production and release of hormones, the body cannot run smoothly without it, and people can quickly lose mental faculties and even regress to cretinism, which is a condition characterized by physical deformity and learning disabilities that is caused by congenital thyroid deficiency. In fact, according to LiveScience.com, India has the highest prevalence of iodine health conditions, with 500 million people suffering from the deficiency, 54 million people from goiter, and 2 million people from full-blown hypothyroidism. I don't have any helpful insights or comedic phrases for this video, but I'll just leave you with this. Supplying India with iodized salt might be the cheapest and easiest way to improve the welfare of the Indian people. There is no awareness of this, and nothing is being done, which is kinda sad. But the truth is, not many people care enough to do something about it. The moral of the story is, make sure to get your iodine and never trust the British government. Bye everyone!